Hey, Dick, how are you? Good morning, Aurora. Oh, you're still muted there. Now it's officially a Zoom meeting.
Of course. Good morning, Kai. Thank you for the invite. And I've been following along the updates for V3, and so I'm happy to finally join in on the meetings.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Yes, and tell me just briefly, what have you been up to lately?
Well, I left the CDFI world. I joined the Alaska Conservation Foundation. I work in operations, and I am supporting our operational role, but also we are interested in finding out a way to support that regenerative economy in Alaska and what that looks like, whether it's program involvement or using some of our foundational resources to support that. So just wanting to stay involved in the startup community and but in a different capacity than in the traditional finance way.
Sure. Well, I think there's a really fascinating intersection here, and it will give folks a few minutes. They always kind of trickle in here for a few minutes, but this discussion we're having on the National Science Foundation Regional Innovation Engine proposal and what's behind some of those questions I put out is there's a group of us that are looking at the question of how could culture and particularly Alaska Native knowledge and values and experience of place be infused into the way we do science, and not just an Alaskan issue, but nationally. There's a trend that has been emerging on the use of team science, and we're looking at that in Alaska as an engine for our economy 30 years from now, and being able to do that. So there's a broader intersection that's happening that brings us back to the startup community and the innovation community that says, let's try and reframe how we're doing innovation and startups and research and science. So I'm so glad that you made the connection to be here today to be a little part of the discussion. We've got a meeting this afternoon that I'm hoping this discussion will help me get a little better prepared for a broader discussion with some of the Alaska corporate native corporation leaders to look at this issue. So anyway, good to connect with you again. I'm glad you're here. Ryan, how are you all trained up?
I'm feeling pretty trained up at this point. I mean, frankly, they reminded us multiple times, we went through an 8-week course in 8 hours. And then we went through what was probably another 8-week course in 8 hours the following day on how to train other people on public narrative. And it was a really inspiring process. It was a nice framework to think about narrative and narrative development. A couple key focus areas were the story of self, the story of us, and the story of now. And you end up with this sense of working between the points. But then more critically, they gave us some things to look for as we're helping to give feedback and help other people cultivate their story of self, us, and now. And I think that that's going to be particularly helpful as we start to collectively think about our story as a state, as a nation, as communities. And so it was a cool process. I was also really inspired by just watching the facilitation team at work, because every one of them in their own right was a rock star. But the way that they all worked together was just very fluid, very natural, very comfortable. And it left everyone who was going through the process also just feeling very supported. And so it's always cool to watch a high performing team work together.
Yeah, very nice. Let's see here. I think we've got a small but critical mass to get started with here. Let me put the agenda document in the chat. I think here I am working with two computers here because my desktop is not playing nicely so far. This should be the normal weekly document that's in the chat for anyone that wants to follow along with that. And I'm trying to bring it up over here. Just half a second here while I get it in front of me. In terms of today's agenda, I put it out in an email, but just kind of hitting the high points there. I was hoping to take just a moment to check in on the SEDS process and discussion from last week, but we don't need to spend much time on it other than just check in on that. I put the link to the recording from last week on there, folks wanted. I was hoping, Ryan, we could take a moment and you could share a little bit about what this workshop was you were doing this week and how it potentially fits in with the impact dialogue work that we're doing and plans that we have for some of the other projects in that. And the other thing I needed to do a quick check-in with folks is we had talked, I think 2 weeks ago before Beth took off on vacation, about trying to schedule a meeting to get those folks that are kind of the wonky folks that want to sit down and try and look at Peter Block and Cooper Ryder and Hegel and Morrison and all that stuff and try and hash out how these different bodies of knowledge and tools intersect and how they build a framework that we're working with to see where we're at with scheduling that. But I really want to get most of the time into discussing this question that's on the table this week and next week about integrating Alaska approaches to Western science and research and technology with Alaska native knowledge and our place in that. But if there's anything else that comes up during introductions that we need to take stock of, let's bring that up. We'll run through just doing brief introductions again, as we usually do, so that everybody knows who's here. What I would encourage you to do today as you introduce yourself is think in terms of what are the assets that you bring to a discussion about the opportunity for Alaska to integrate Western science research and Alaska Native knowledge and history and culture. What are the assets you have? And those assets may be resources you specifically have available to you. It might be organizational connections, might be experience, might be tools. Obviously, we can't. We probably spend hours with everybody individually on this, but I wonder if you could just pick out a couple of high points as you think about what are the assets that you bring into this potential kind of work that blends these two worlds as a framing of that. So also, if you get a chance, if you want to add any notes as we go in today, I would encourage you to use the link to the document I put there and just actually jump into it and help with notes. I'll try and take some along the way, but I may not be able to keep up, and I would welcome anyone dropping any comments or thoughts into the document so that we have a better, more complete record of that discussion. So if you don't mind, then I will get started here. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get to my participant list again here. Let's start off. Ryan, if you wouldn't mind jumping back in again, and then we'll go down to Beth and we'll continue working through the list here in a moment. But Ryan, you're up first, then it'll be Beth.
Yeah, thank you. Hey everyone, my name is Ryan Witten. I have been serving as the Executive Director for Alaska Version 3, as well as working with a couple other nonprofits within our community to help develop our food systems, our communities, and our economy. And this past week, I spent a lot of time thinking about the stories of self, stories of us, stories of now, and the story that we tell ourselves about who we are, where we're going, what our future looks like. And there's a lot of resonance within the community after going through a workshop hosted by the Alaska Humanities Forum on Public Narrative. There was a lot of folks in that room who were really invested in that story and really invested in working together as a community to help our community heal and grow together. And so that was really nourishing to go through and to share that space with folks who were willing to dive into those deep conversations. I then went for a little bit of fishing yesterday and spent some time with my partner and her family and pulled up some halibut. And so I'm thankful for the state and everything that it offers us, and hope that I'm doing it justice in the process.
Thanks, Ryan. Beth, and then Dick, you'll be up next.
Hey, everybody. Beth Wake is here, just off of a nice, relaxing vacation with family and friends back east. And I've been involved with AKV3 now, I don't even know, Kai, like 6-8 months, just here to support the processes. I have a background in organization development, systems change, and communications. So I helped with some of the initial collateral. Came through Kitty Farnham, love working, have done some work in Alaska in the past. And I'm thinking about the assets, I think that what I bring is some knowledge of community building from Peter Block's work, some background working with Cooper Ryder on appreciative inquiry, facilitation, and a real interest in listening and learning more about the wisdom that comes from Alaska Native, Alaska Native folks into this process, and really curious on how I can help integrating those two. Well, AKV1 and AKV2 into AKV3. So it's just, I really appreciate the innovation and the wisdom of the people in this group and a lot of the lived experience too. So I'm just here to support and do what I can to help.
Thanks for joining us. I'm glad you're back from the vacation, and I hope that was relaxing.
It
Dick,
was great.
Great. Dick, you're up, and then Dixie.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Yeah, I checked in this morning with a friend of mine. Some of you may know Patricia Cochran. She is trying to extradite herself from being the executive director of the Alaska Native Science Commission. And that fit, they were a client many years ago. And that fits nicely with the topic, the question that you put out there this morning, Kai. And Patricia, I gave her just like a 30-second overview of what we're doing here and the question, and she was quite interested. And so she may be a person that we could invite in later. She's very experienced. She's Alaska Native. And I think, I don't know if any of you know her, but she's terrific. And I just finished 2 days in an offsite with a large Alaska Native for-profit corporation. And I won't say too much right now about that, but also working with a large 10 villages that can form a a large native, it's a large native nonprofit consortium. And so I got two sides of the same beast. I got the one it's more traditional Alaska Native, and then you have the Western model with a for-profit corporation, and the dynamics that go on and have gone on in that environment is still getting played out, as you folks know. But Peter Block was one of my instructors at the National Training Laboratory way back in the late 80s. I attended, and I was also trained in appreciative inquiry in Phoenix, not by Cooper Ryder, but one of his disciples. So I've used that in a number of cases, number of situations, and it's a great process. I love it. So yeah, I'll be quiet here and kick in some other thoughts later.
Great. Thanks for joining us, Dick, and some incredible connections and resources you got there. Dixie, and then Meetup.
I'm Dixie from the Valley. What my area of expertise is more the military. My goal is maybe with working with the natives corporations and various others organizations to bring. My goal is to bring resources from the lower 48 up here. I went to a veteran meeting and I saw what I saw in the state. They still want to stay within this the fishbowl. They don't want to go outside and find new things. There's so much out there in the lower 48 that we could bring up here to Alaskans. My specialty is networking, getting out there, meeting people, connecting, because people are really fascinated by Alaska. They want to share ideas, resources. I think what we have to do is we have to be a little more proactive. We can't stay within the fishbowl. And it was really frustrating because I mentioned the fact was there's this, and this, and they look at me and it's like, where are you coming from? And it's like, you guys, especially in this group, you are really aware of outside sources and new organizations that you've been collaborating with for a time. But for the most part, most people up here are staying within Alaska. And that's where we're limited, because we could have so many remote opportunities up here if we could work together with organizations down south.
Yeah, wonderful perspective. Thanks for sharing that, as well as continuing the work that you're doing in that area. Let's see. Yes, go ahead.
And the deal is we got connected with, I wanted to mention to you, and I didn't get to the email, was we had a meeting with the USDA. They're supposed to still start supporting the food industry in Alaska, but USDA was, they said they were going to offer classes this fall and network, because they do this with Pennsylvania, I think it is. And I talked to the Department of Agriculture down here in Palmer. They are challenged. I don't understand, but we need to foster this program and for all of us, because if we don't foster an opportunity to produce our own food up here, we're going to get lost in the shuffle. And you guys with your connections need to push the state to think outside the box and get us to where we are being self-reliant.
Wonderful. Lots of food system related opportunities there for sure. Mita, welcome and good morning. And then it'll be Aurora.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, beat that drum of food security. So I've been citing the statistics that 95% of our food and goods are shipped from outside. We have a week's worth of food in the state. I've been saying that for like almost 15 years now, and I'm getting tired of that. So what do I bring? Well, I have experience in community organizing and education and public speaking and bringing awareness. And I have over 20 years of work in traditional healing and working with community health and wellness, and have established a reputation through the state for that. And political organizing, led one of the biggest grassroots movements in the state, and listened to bipartisan groups from all over and what their desires are for the future of Alaska. And that all is really awesome and great, but mostly I just like to play with plants and feed people really good things. And I get really overworked and overwhelmed and overtapped, and I just want to like put it all away and go play in my backyard and make food. But yeah, so the kids started back to school yesterday, and Chris started working in a out of the house. And so now I find myself at home for a large swath of the day. So I may be recuperated here and ready to charge next week. And
Standing.
yeah, so
You've had a busy summer from what little bit I've been able to follow.
yeah, and I'm slowing down because I'm getting old, Kai. This is summer.
Don't say that. Those of us in the same park are trying to figure out whether we're slowing down, speeding up, or being more efficient. Let's see, Aurora, welcome. It's good to see you. It's been a little while, but I'd love if you could take a second to introduce yourself and kind of share some of the work you've done and some of the assets that you might bring to some of this work we're doing.
Yeah, thank you, Kai, for the opportunity and for organizing this. And thankful to hear everyone's experience and sharing what they are doing and what they can bring to the table. I currently am a graduate student at APU, taking some of Dick's classes, pursuing my MBA, but my daytime job, I currently am supporting operations with the Alaska Conservation Foundation. We work to mobilize various efforts throughout Alaska. I have a personal background of facilitating classes and in the villages and creating some culturally relevant materials that were framed for urban areas and reshaping those for our rural villages. And so a little bit of an entrepreneurial ecosystem background, but now I'm focused on the conservation efforts in Alaska, and a couple projects that are efforts that our organization works on are, we have the Northern Latitude programs, and that's that supports various organizing, movement building throughout Alaska and the various regions, and aligning several organizations to collaborate and coordinate for a shared vision. And some of our projects also include the tribal conservation districts and implementing some of these resilience farms throughout the state. And I'm still new to the role and still learning to the extent of the work done, but the more I'm here, the more I learn about the efforts and how far back they go and how many people were involved. And Mita, your name has been familiar from some of the past work, and it's really encouraging to pull this all together and join in these conversations on the future of Alaska. So thank you for the opportunity to join and be a part of it.
For joining us today. So many interesting connections with the work that you're doing and the opportunities that they offer all of us, both within some of the stuff coming out of our particular AKV3, but more importantly, these meetings on Fridays have generally been, I think, best in just building some connections and a few people connecting and then going off and continuing their work because they were able to find that intersection. So I'm glad you're here to share that. And I know that it overlaps with many of the work areas of others that are here today. Shelley, I see you jumped in here. Do you want to take a moment and say hi? And we've been focusing a little bit on our introductions today on assets that we bring into the question of the day relating to the potential integration of Alaska Native knowledge and knowing with Western science and technology that we're going to come back to in a minute, but just brief introduction, but also any initial top of mind thoughts about assets related to that intersection.
Sure. Actually, I'll just be really brief. Shelley Roughton, I have been in Alaska for 7.5 years. Part of that in Fairbanks, part of it in Anchorage. Most of it concentrated on work on land, but now I'm in policy. And so I hope to be able to really contribute in the policy realm. But my goal in life is actually just to find META land to farm on. If I can do that, I've succeeded in life. That I've been working on for a couple of years now. But as far as, you know, bringing the native knowledge and traditions and know-how into Western business and processes and all of that, you know, I would love to see large corporations bring on, you know, native advisors. I think that that would go a long way towards healing some wounds and creating some respect, and you know, maybe even creating some efficiencies for these businesses who jump into Alaska and don't know what they're getting into. You know, natives have a lot to offer as far as knowledge, and could offer them a lot of help. So I think the more we work together, the better we will be. So
Cool. Thanks for those thoughts and joining us today. Have I missed anybody who's jumped in? I think I've got everybody. Cool. Well, just briefly here before we jump on here, you know, everybody I think knows I'm Kai, and I've been down in Portland this week and doing all sorts of things. But one of the things that has been incredible has been exploring this intersection question that's come up and this potential engine for not only science and technology, but also how it intersects with actually creating a powerful way of anchoring the innovation and the knowledge that exists here in our state about our plants, our animals, our resources, our climate, anchoring that into methods that are tied to the corporations and organizations that are based here and are anchored here. One of the things that always impresses me when I think about Alaska Native and tribal organizations is they're not going to relocate to Houston one of these days when times change and they need a new corporate headquarters or something. These organizations have been here for thousands of years in the cultural community sense. They're groups of people and organizations that are going to be here in 1,000 years from now if we can save the planet from ourselves. So I'm super excited about this window of opportunity here. The other thought that I just wanted to raise, just as kind of top of mind, is how difficult the transitions are. I'm watching some work going on right now in climate change and energy transitions, and there's a whole bunch of folks that are struggling with these changes and just want to go back to mining coal and using coal to make power and just stop the change here. And so we have to do that. But at any rate, in terms of assets, lots of facilitation work over the years, and a deep appreciation for building broad, diverse communities that can solve problems in new ways. I'm super excited to continue the work with this group. I want to kind of jet ahead with some things just real quickly on some housekeeping here. The SEDS process, the comments are due on the 26th. I think that's the end of next week. There is the link in this document as well as in the email I sent out to the recording from last week with Nolan. It was a good conversation. He provided some good information I would recommend to folks that would like to learn more about it. This SEDS document is not the be all end all. It's not an action document when it's all done, but it does force a conversation about our strategies for the future. And Nolan's comments about how the SEDS comments that are submitted are, have to be collected and have to be reviewed and have to be considered. And for us to, put some key questions out there and thoughts, it's a way to create a record for some of the issues, even if the SEDS strategies aren't necessarily going in all the directions you might or I might want them to go in. This process helps us think through that and helps us create a record of some of the transitions that we're going through and forces a recognition of some of these new issues. So I encourage you to get your comments in because it does become a part of an important national record and state record that folks are going to have to come back to, even if the final strategies don't necessarily go as far as we might want them to. Are there any questions or comments regarding SEDS before we move on? Hearing none, going once, going twice. Second point here in terms of check-in stuff is, Ryan, in the interest of time though, but not wanting to miss, I'm just wondering if you have kind of a brief recap of what this training was you went through this week and kind of why it's maybe important.
Yeah, thank you, Kai. I will do my best to keep things brief here. So let's see here. I would like to share my screen for just a minute. So the training that I went through was a public narrative training that was hosted by members of the Harvard Kennedy, the Harvard University, it's the Kennedy School, and they were Masters of Education folks that went through a narrative training process and then have become facilitators of this training process. And they work with storytelling and narrative and organizing and a couple other focus areas that, and it was really powerful training to go through. And what they did with us as a group was to help us to develop our own story of self, our story of us, which could be any group, whether that is us in the room or us as a community or us as a state, and the story of now. And now is largely what is the challenge or the opportunity that we have in front of us, and how can we work to realize that opportunity? And they helped us to identify key points in a story to effectively connect with people and why storytelling is so powerful.
I'm sorry, Ryan, Ryan, just half a second here. The screen you're sharing is showing us the Shoal Shift document.
It is. I don't have a digital copy of the documentation that the Harvard School has given us.
Okay, perfect. I thought maybe you just had the wrong window up.
Yeah, no, I just don't have that yet. I tried to track it down and haven't been able to, and haven't gotten to scan it in yet. But the Shoal Shift document is one that I keep going back to as some foundational work within strategic doing and as a model that we can look at for the opportunity that sits in front of us as a community, as Alaska. And if we were to think about the opportunity that we have as we have conversation, this conversation is shifting. The narrative is one of those things that can help to shift the conversation that's happening. And when we look at the 4 areas here for the portfolio of collaborations for ecosystem development, in the lower left-hand quadrant is new narratives. And so this was a really strong connection for me throughout this workshop, was the importance of working on our narrative as a state. And as we were telling stories, there were several stories that came up that centered around the challenges that we're facing as a state. You know, folks at one point were describing a sense of hopelessness that they are feeling, or shame for some of the activities that are happening within our community. If we were to look back and to our last week's meeting and think about the SEDS document, a comment that was made was that document, the engines within that document are largely neutral or in decline. And so that makes me think about, what is the narrative that we are telling ourselves as a state for what our future looks like? And so I see this process, this public narrative work, fitting in into the state of into the future of our state, as we think about what could be next for us, and what is the story that we tell ourselves about this place and the opportunities that are in front of us, and tying that into the heritage that we have as a state. It also is intentionally woven into the dialogue process that Alaska version 3 will be using with the Ascent project, as we work with communities to identify assets and to help folks to connect and realize opportunities that are available with the influx of federal funding and the strengths that they have within their own community. And so there's a lot of connection there. And this, I left I'm feeling a bit recharged, and also feeling like I had some more tools in my toolkit. And frankly, I'm ready to go try and do some fundraising and try and advocate to get this team back up here again, because their organizer training and their narrative training is very powerful. And I think that it's tools that would be very helpful in the hands of other members of our community.
Thanks, Ryan. Any questions for Ryan, or thoughts on what he's been doing this week, or information? Like, I did put the link to that Shoal Shift document into the chat for those that would like to look at it. It's one we've relied on in the past. There's a lot of fundamentals in that report that are really kind of foundational approaches that AKV3 has been exploring and trying to use as a framing for how we've been moving forward for the last couple of years, that are found in the stories and the methods and tools that you'll find in that document.
I just shared a link to the larger course that is offered by this group, and I think this would probably be the 8-week course. And so there are virtual versions of this longer extended course that you can go through, and we got a condensed version that the Alaska Humanities Forum helped to host. One of the members of the forum actually was one of the facilitators, or was a facilitator on this team who worked with them for years, and had it as a priority of his to try and get this team up to work within our community, and was able to realize that vision. And so it was a really cool connection, and an example of the assets that we have within our communities, within our space, and how those assets can be really helpful.
Comments or questions for Ryan?
I know Aurora went through that course too, so maybe she's got some thoughts.
Oh, fantastic.
It looked like you had a question there too. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, I don't necessarily have a question. I just think it's interesting how there for a long time, people have been saying like these spiritual principles are important to start implementing in like mainstream thought and activity. And one of them was speaking into being the reality that you want to see.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because we're creator beings, and we program ourselves and we program each other, and we get in sync as social beings. So I love seeing this narrative work, and I'm really glad that you went through that training, because this is actually part of the process that we need to be working through to start to collectively resonate together, so that we start moving together into a positive future.
Yeah, it's struck me that a lot of the tools that are being used are maybe tools that have already been developed and have been carried by those who came before us for generations, and maybe they just have a new framing. And so this also really, I think it's a potential example of that merging of the traditional knowledge and in a scientific framing, but this recognition that there's a lot of overlap. And a lot of opportunity for it to work together, because they are very powerful tools. And so there's sort of a reawakening in some ways.
Or anything you wanted to add on to what Ryan and Meetup also mentioned about the class? I didn't realize you had attended it. That's good news.
Yeah, I attended, and it was good to connect with other members of the community. The benefit there is like the narrative and the empowering of self, but the empowering of others. So maybe each partner has tools that they're able to bring out in each other, and empowering each other's stories. And the stories are there. It's just like, how do you help your peers address the community they're engaging? And it's like, it's code switching for people from the villages, for people of color, and that capacity to be able to present their ideas in a compelling manner across all sectors and all audiences. So powerful comments. I second what has been said already.
Thanks for that. Thanks, Ryan, for going over that, and maybe we can do a deeper dive into that in the future when there's an opportunity. I'm gonna, I think, leave a request to Ryan and Beth, rather than taking more time on this. If the two of you, and pull me in as you need to, could follow up maybe in the next couple days on the efforts to try and coordinate a meetup to dive into the Peter Block, Cooper Ryder, Hagel, that whole issue that we had talked about, trying to organize that. And I know we got started on that right before some folks were taking on vacation, including Beth. But I don't know if they got anchored, but I don't want to take any more time on that unless there's something specific you want to bring up at the moment. Otherwise, if you could follow up afterwards, that would be great.
No, just to say thanks for the nudge there. I owe Beth and the group a doodle poll to figure out some time, and I'm looking forward to reconnecting and having that conversation.
Okay, thanks for that update. So let's jump over now into this set of questions I had. I know we won't have a lot of time. I primarily wanted to get these questions out there and see where they went. And just for framing, I'm going to try and be super brief on this. The National Science Foundation's Regional Innovation Engine process has resulted in a number of proposals that are being developed right now. And out of that has come this question that Pat Simpson really kind of brought to the table in the last 10 days, saying, this is a 10-year, $160 million opportunity, and they're only going to put 10 of these in the entire country. And we need to think a bit bolder, potentially, in what we might do if we even want to go after this funding, than just simply having another EDA style economic development, a little bit of technology development in there. And so it has a discussion that has begun this afternoon, a meeting with some Alaska Native Corporation leaders. Mita, I'm still hoping you're going to be able to help out with that. I apologize for the snafu we had on our scheduling yesterday. But we're talking about the question of, is there something really compelling around taking what has been happening in the ways of science over the last, I've seen it for the last 5 years, in this thing called team science. That's an approach of bringing in discipline diversity, that is bringing in people that study humanities with people that study science, that deal with people that study environment, and bringing those together into teams to do the work of science and research. And what we're talking about is, let's take this the next step, and let's recognize that Alaska's economy in 30 years is probably going to be driven by Alaska Native corporations and people, and the ownership that they have over assets, the employment that they create. And we have an opportunity, I think, to create a very novel new model of how science and research and innovation is done, picking up on many of the things we just talked about in the last few minutes about this intersection of Alaska knowledge, culture, the timeless knowledge of this place and people, but bringing it into the way we look at the challenges ahead of us. And I think more particularly dealing with the the challenge we have of how will we actually come together to implement the knowledge that comes from this research and work. And if we continue to leave science off in its own little world doing its thing, and the rest of us in communities and culture doing here, we will have what we just saw in the pandemic, which is an inability for us across the community to come together to deal with big existential opportunities and threats. And so we're talking about a big new idea that would be worthy of being one of 10 in the country, and $160 million in a 10-year effort, because this will take a while. So I've put out this question of what would it look like of Alaska integrated Western science research and technology development activities with the timeless Alaska native knowledge of the natural and cultural place where we live. I don't even know if that's the right way to frame the question.
It's like tech and tech. That's like my PhD study.
Well, that's why when this came up, Mita, I was so interested in trying to pull you into this discussion, because I knew that you, amongst all the people I know, probably know this middle space better than anybody else. Is the question even the right question? Does it need to be framed differently?
I don't think that needs to be framed that can we do it. I think that it needs to be acknowledged that traditional ecological knowledge has been used in several sectors of Western advancement of science and technology, and that in order to engage this next evolution of our thinking and being, that we need to incorporate both Western technology and traditional indigenous knowledge or traditional ecological knowledge, because the traditional ecological knowledge paired cosmology, theology with the hard sciences to create a more in-depth, broader worldview and a more resonant experience with reality, and helped to bring the wisdom into the space of science. So the experience into the space of science, values into the space of science. So instead of it being a siloed scientific model with empirical data that was only applicable in one space, it helps to create a framework where there's a holistic application of data that then becomes encultured.
I think you just said a PhD level answer, and my brain is rattling with the significance of every word you used there, and how you framed it. I was right. You know this in such a deep way. As we talk about this for a minute, I would also just invite anybody to jump in and add any bullets you'd like to in this discussion. The second couple questions kind of dive different layers into this. This first question was kind of this bigger framing of, is this the right question? Is this the way to look at it? Are we using the right words? I mean, I've even struggled with the very basic thing of, do I use the word indigenous or do I use the word native? And I realized that, particularly, I don't know the right words to use. And I realize in different contexts and situations, one might be just viewed as just fine. The other one, somebody might look at me cross-eyed in terms of doing that. So I'm sensitive to some of these things, but also blind to many of them. But the second question kind of leads into, a little more specific application of the first question, terms of things that we know matter in Alaska: housing, jobs, salmon, climate change impacts. And the third question kind of takes it to the stage, and this is the important connection with the NSF opportunity, is they're trying to figure out how to make science more actually relevant, meaningful, and impactful. And I see that as an opportunity to connect it to our economies and where Alaska is going, so that if we made a 10-year investment, we could say, this is where we're trying to get to in 30 years in terms of the benefit. It's not just science for the sake of doing better science, but it's actually a different way of doing science and research and technology to create a better place. And as I mentioned at the beginning today, trying to see how do we anchor it in the Alaska organizations, corporate, tribal, CDQs, and whatnot. Other thoughts and reactions, either to the questions and maybe helping improve how they're framed, or thoughts you have on some of the what are some of the perspectives and approaches that you see that might address some of these questions?
Well, I'll jump in real quick, Kai. I mean, I think, I don't know if everyone knows, I was raised on my home reservation in Montana. And I left the res when I was 33 and moved to Bush, Alaska, 1978. And I spent time there, and then I moved to Anchorage and worked for the Anchorage School District for 5 years. And then 86 started my own consulting practice. And so in that time, the Native community here in the lower 48 has been a major area for me to work in. So for the past 36 years, I've worked with all of the regional corporations at some level, and many of the village corporations and nonprofits, healthcare and all that. And there's been, to me, an evolution and the tension, I think, between, especially with ANCSA, a lot of the Western model that's been set up. And I think the reemergence of within a traditional knowledge and the application to not just in healthcare, but I think in just how communities and economies and business decisions are being made. And that tension, I think, is becoming even more pronounced as we look at conditions or impact of climate change and economic income disparity, all of, alphabet of different kinds of challenges. But I'm very optimistic. I'm a pragmatic optimist. I think I would say maybe even third generation within the Native community of leaders is very evident. I think is just extraordinary. It's happening, and so I'm very positive about what I see. I think that tension's creating a lot of very interesting conversations in boardrooms, tribal councils, and so forth. Let me just leave it there, because I think it's a great combination that's coming together, both the Western and traditional.
It's encouraging to hear. I was reflecting in one of my conversations. I can't remember if it's in one of the notes that I was, and I know there's some baggage here, but I was reflecting on how the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act really was, for many people, viewed as a really radical shift in how Alaska Native issues would be resolved using some Western, approaches, that is, corporate entities, to be able to address some of that. And I know it's imperfect in many ways. However, the opportunity I was seeing with this science discussion and research was, how could we do something as big and bold as what was done with the Alaska Native Settlement Act, in terms of thinking differently about the relationship of the knowledge and the people and the place? How could we be as big and bold as that was in the early 70s in what we do now with this opportunity to deal with climate change, energy transitions, and the science and research and Western work that needs to merge into the work that can be done with people and place and knowledge to do that? And that legacy of being so innovative as we were in the early 70s, to me, sets the stage to be equally or more innovative now in how we approach the changes. And reading through comments in the last week of different posts related to climate change impacts, we've got a large portion of our population that is not ready to embrace the changes that are ahead, and we're going to have to do this differently if we're going to be successful.
I have a question, Kai.
Yeah.
This group is very innovative and open-minded and willing to work and go above and beyond, whereas the state of Alaska, especially with the state, and you have individuals that they want to keep grasp of control. And I think this agenda will force accountability and open doors, because there are so many people like myself. I'm limited. I'm being forced to go outside to work, and I have to leave home in order to do it, to survive. So bottom line is, this is something that we're open. I don't want to say Pandora's box, but it's a positive venue that will make positive change if we do it right.
Excellent comment. Thank you.
Am I right?
I think you are. You're serving up the same Kool-Aid. I love it.
Yeah, I think so. I see Mita's got her hand up.
Yeah, go for
Yeah.
it.
Well, what you were saying, Kai, kind of crosswalks in then to the Wilderness Society. So at the Wilderness Society, I'm the senior specialist and the Imago Initiative Coordinator. And Imago is creating a new way of conservation, which is based on our old way of doing things. But with INCSA and ANILCA, we had a shift of millions of acres into corporate status and into federal status. So right now we have 60, almost or more than 60% of our lands in Alaska are federally owned. And what we're doing is we're working on co-stewardship. So not as a one-off, because a lot of times people use the word co-management, but co-management is species specific. And the frameworks are different from group to group. And so what we're looking at is creating a actual co-stewardship framework that can be applied and integrated with every indigenous group that's bordering federal lands, which are their traditional lands. And so the Imago Initiative has been running for almost 3 years now. And we've had a working group of 40 people plus 60 people. Usually we have 20 show up and whatever. And then we've taken groups out, built a conservation, indigenous, and policymakers out onto the land, into the Arctic Refuge. The largest group ever to go out into the refuge 2 years consecutively. And so we're now writing up what would be an Imago Initiative bill that is slated to go forward next year. Hopefully we have the right mix of congressional and senators after the elections in November. Sorry, de-escalate. But that model has to address climate change, stewardship, biodiversity, and economic stability. And so it encompasses all of those, while also looking at the issues with INCSA removing Aboriginal title, and NILCA limiting conservation lands and also restricting subsistence use and activities, while also delegating them for rural people and not identifying actual Alaska Native people, and addressing all of these kinds of issues. And so yesterday we actually met with a conservation fund, John, who's here in the state, and looking at conservation easements, because when we do this, we have to address stranded assets for, like, instance, UIC and KIC, Kaktovik, their rural or village, corporation has land with potential oil extraction that's in the 1002 area, which is the calving grounds for the porcupine caribou herd. So how do we monetize that in a way that resolves their need to create economic value for their shareholders, which are also their community members and the indigenous people? So at some point, I need to give you guys a presentation on that, and then maybe engage your support in helping when we move to get a bill ready to up and transition.
Yeah, what's striking me is this, the kind of the pendulum swing, and when we had the ANILCA Act, I mean, it seemed like it was taking indigenous communities, indigenous values, and then trying to put them into the traditional corporate structure. And I'm seeing a bit of this pendulum swing in the other direction at this point. And I've been really interested in watching these conversations where lakes and different bonds have been also given corporate personhood. and have been they've used this method as a way to figure out how to advocate for these natural resources within the Western corporate and legal structures. And what it strikes me is that, Dick had shared an article, How Can Society Prepare for the Moral Norms of Tomorrow? And so I've shared a link to that. And what strikes me is that we're searching for a way to capture what are the new moral norms? What are our values within our economy and within our society as we grapple with climate change and the challenges of today? And it strikes me that the pendulum is perhaps swinging in the other direction. And where in the past we look to more of the Western traditional legal structures to give guidance and give structure to everything that we do, now we have an opportunity for traditional indigenous knowledge to really give value and give structure to the ways that we run our societies. And I would offer that I believe the knowledge and the people that are in our rural communities are at this point stranded assets themselves, that there's a lot of knowledge and learning and perspective that is untapped and is not integrated into Western society or into the science, the traditional scientific process, but that there's a lot of value that those folks have and that would really could really bring to inform science in our process there. So dumped a lot. I'm going to take a step back and recognize that we're at 10:58.
I'm blown away by the idea that our people are now stranded assets. Wow. Shelley, I'm wondering if you've got any thoughts. You have an interesting policy perspective from the work that you've done and where you're at. How is this resonating or not with you?
I have to admit, I'm over here working on a deadline for something, so I don't have anything brilliant to add today.
No worries. Thanks.
But I'm enjoying listening.
Yeah, sorry to call you out there. I just know that you're in an interesting space and you're a huge resource for us as this develops down the road. So I'm so grateful that you're following along with this thread. We are at about the hour. I'm wondering if there are any other additional thoughts anyone would like to throw out, either about the framing of the question that might help these questions become more powerful, or particular aspects of how we might look at these questions that you think we should capture that are kind of top of mind for you now, that I don't want to lose as we wrap up for today. And we'll come back to these questions in the future, but any nuggets that you would like to share that we need to capture from what we've been talking about?
Yeah, Kai, I'd like to add that the question itself is very, very broad, and it would probably strengthen the impact if we were able to make it more specific and provide specific examples, like how the practice of traditional knowledge, tribal members, and Western technology, and how marrying those together can inform specific policy. I think subsistence policy comes to mind, and as one specific example, but it would empower the impact if we were able to make it more specific and provide examples of where this has been proven successful.
Thanks. Good time. Adding that into both. The second question was kind of starting to tee that up, but I like the feedback on the question, but also your comment about some specific examples.
I don't think we'll be at a loss to find those specific examples. I think that there's a lot of work that's been done that is really powerful. And so now it's getting the folks together to hold those examples up, create a network to share that knowledge, and to let it ride.
Yeah, that's when I started into this. People wanted me to give them all the secrets to the universe with all the specific examples. And then even just scratching the surface, there's so many of them. Like, we could fill whole libraries, just for instance, American Sign Language is based on Plains trade language. right? In our food systems, when permaculture is rooted in indigenous food systems. Even just the major food supplies across the world are based off of indigenous food. And even like you look at maize and corn, right? That hybridization to create an abundance. Like we could just do whole dissertations on one thing at a time and then create an entire university just examining the tech that's already being applied in Western systems. So then it's a matter of just picking and choosing where we want to apply it and what we want to use. And then maybe just establishing that, you know, as a common knowledge that it already exists and there are already benefits instead of the colonial erasure of our epistemologies. Okay, I gotta go. I love you guys. See you later.
Are you gonna be able to join
Love
us
you.
at 2? Do you want to talk beforehand?
Call me at noon.
Okay, see ya. Bye. All right, thank you all. It's been great chatting. Please, this document is still there if you want to make any more notes afterwards or later or follow up on it or get a hold of me. I'm so grateful for the time and the information you shared today. Thank you and have a great weekend. I'll be around for, actually, I got to run too. I got an 11 o'clock meeting. So reach out if you'd like to chat more.
Thank you all. Take care.
See ya. Thanks for joining today.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Beth, oh, she hopped off. Okay. Well, I'll reconnect with her. Shelley,
Okay.
see
Bye, Ryan.
you again soon.
Hey, Ryan, let's do next Thursday after 2:30.
Okay, yeah, sounds good to me. Guy, I'm like getting
Okay.
chills having these conversations. I'm really feeling like we've got the right stuff going on and the right people that are showing up.
So yes, exactly. Okay, I gotta run to a workforce discussion. I'm gonna follow the Meetup. We can chat some more early this afternoon if you'd like.
Sounds great. I'm going to be meeting with Chris from 11:30 to 1, but I'll have a gap of about an hour before the 2 o'clock.
Okay, sounds good. I really need to rattle the cage on that Ascent project.
Yeah, getting things moving.
Yep, thanks. See ya.
Thank you.